Good morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, Speaker standoff. Day 3 of the new Congress, and the House is still without a speaker. After 6 rounds of voting, House Republicans have failed to get behind GOP leader Kevin McCarthy for the top job.
We'll keep talking. We'll find and get to the agreement.
This country needs a change.
I still have the most votes.
This means members can't be sworn in and no other business in the House can move forward right now. The latest on the GOP efforts to unite behind a speaker as they get ready to vote again today. New this morning, Royal Rift, part of Prince Harry's new book, is leaked. And according to a report, the royal alleges he was physically attacked by his brother and future king, Prince William. What Harry says caused that fight and the other information the book reportedly reveals about their fractured relationship. Historic funeral. Tens of thousands attend the funeral of Pope Emeritus Benedict at the Vatican. The service was unprecedented, with the current Pope Francis presiding over it. We're live at the Vatican with a recap of the service and a look back at Benedict's legacy. Also this morning, Era of Innovation. The Consumer Electronics Show kicks off, giving us a look at some of the biggest and most unique tech products companies are working on. From virtual reality to a wireless TV, we'll show you some of the devices that could soon be on store shelves. Joe, you need a new TV.
No, I have a new TV and a very old TV.
How old?
That still works.
How old?
16, 17, 18 years now.
We'll send you to the Consumer Electronics Show next year. Good morning to all of you at home. We begin this morning in Washington, where lawmakers will try again today to elect a new speaker. Yeah, fighting within the Republican Party over the last 2 days has left the House at a standstill with no clear option for Speaker of the House.
Well, it's Groundhog Day. Again.
Sure, it looks messy. But democracy is messy.
Do you think that the American people support the status quo?
The root issue is this: they do not trust Kevin McCarthy. There is no frustration on our side. We are focused on serving the American people.
Washington is completely broken.
For the second straight day, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy failed to secure the Speaker's gavel. Despite last-minute negotiations, McCarthy was unable to move any of the Republican holdouts yesterday over to his side. Frustration was felt throughout the chamber as chaos erupted when Republicans adjourned for the day.
On this vote, the yeas are 216, the nays are 214. Accordingly,
So now Republicans are entering a third day of voting with no clear path forward. With that, we bring in NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin for the latest on all this. Julie, good morning. So do we have any idea what scenarios could play out today? Any clue how this might end?
Well, first of all, Joe, you need a new TV to watch C-SPAN on, because clearly they have been on the floor trying to haggle this out. 6 failed speaker votes for Kevin McCarthy yesterday. They were meeting in small groups. One of the members, one of the allies of McCarthy, actually told me that meeting in big conference groups isn't working out for them anymore, because all these members, the 20 defectors who are opposed to McCarthy, have different demands. But what we're learning overnight is that Kevin McCarthy actually made them new offers, going even further to meet their very aggressive conservative demands. Some of those I want to tick through really quickly. One of them we have confirmed, for example, is the biggest one, which would take just one member to essentially challenge the speaker, which will prove very difficult for McCarthy. Though these defectors swore not to abuse this, it would be really challenging for him. If one person can just call up a vote to oust him at any minute, it could be difficult and potentially derail his agenda. Some more things. For example, tapping more of the House Freedom Caucus members to sit on the powerful Rules Committee. This structures the way that the floor works. The Speaker looks to this committee for any legislation, for floor schedules. So this is a really, really big deal, and it's a concession, I have to tell you, moderate members did not want to make.
Yeah, so Julie, I mean, you mentioned some of these concessions here that we're seeing. There's some pretty steep concessions, and there's still not enough to move the needle at all when it comes to these holdouts. I mean, is there any consensus right now on a path forward?
Yeah, look, it's interesting here. You had the motion to adjourn last night that actually passed. That's actually indicative that Kevin McCarthy is potentially trending in some positive directions, because only 4 of those defectors, including Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, voted against that motion to adjourn to give McCarthy more time to negotiate. Let's take a listen to what she had to say yesterday.
So let's work together. Let's stop with the campaign smears and tactics to get people to turn against us. Even having my favorite president call us and tell us we need to knock this off. I think it actually needs to be reversed. The president needs to tell Kevin McCarthy that, sir, you do not have the votes and it's time to withdraw.
Look, Matt Gaetz, also one of those 4 defectors who actually voted against the motion to adjourn yesterday, walking out of the Capitol after he was able to get some of these concessions out of Kevin McCarthy. He still said, I don't trust him. So it's not clear whether today, even when they gavel back in at noon, that we will have a speaker. And if we don't have a speaker, remember, the government is basically not functioning. We don't have a functioning House without a speaker. They cannot set an agenda. They can't even pay themselves while they're not officially sworn into Congress. And also, just to remind our viewers, this is a week where all these members of Congress are excited to get sworn in. There's families, there's children in the chamber that are now just sitting around as they wait to actually elect a speaker and govern.
Julie, just to be crystal clear, these defectors, they're calling for change, but they're not actually proposing someone else to be speaker, right?
No, they proposed Byron Donalds, who was a freshman congressman last term. He's not getting more than a couple of votes. Those defectors, that's about 20, clearly not enough to get to 218. And they are not proposing another candidate. They're just saying no to Kevin McCarthy.
All right, Julie Sirkin, we know you'll stay on it. Thank you so much.
Now let's get to your morning news now. Weather. California has declared a state of emergency as it braces for another powerful storm. Meteorologist Angie Lastman's tracking the conditions. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. And I keep getting this question. What is going on the West Coast that's allowing for all this moisture to work in? And here's the two-word answer, Pineapple Express. I know you've probably heard about an atmospheric river over the past couple of days. Yes, this is a type of atmospheric river that's a really thin band of moisture that stretches from Hawaii, hence the name of Pineapple Express, and goes all the way to the West Coast. It's basically a conveyor belt for moisture. This is what's really bringing the intense moisture onshore. We get into the coastal areas of California. You have some mountains that helps lift that air, and eventually all that moisture packed in that plume of air basically squeezes out, and we're talking about heavy rain working through. So this is what's causing all of this, and it's really reaping, it's beneficial in some aspects, but once it gets to a certain point, then we're looking at some difficult conditions for folks on the West Coast. And that's what's kind of unfolding now. We've seen heavy rainfall overnight for places like San Francisco and north of that. And now we're starting to see the heavy rain work into places like Los Angeles. And that's where we'll be watching for the heavy rain to continue through the day today. It'll be periods of heavy rain. There will be some breaks in there, but then we just turn around and have another system working onshore thanks to that atmospheric river. Here's the flood watch concerns right now. 33 million people still included in that up and down California. We have some flood warnings in effect as well, because again, just ample amount of moisture to tap into as we go through the next couple of days. Here's the additional rainfall amounts that we could see. Los Angeles already has had up to 3 inches through the morning hours, and we're expecting that secondary system, or at this point, third, fourth, whatever it is, to work onshore through Friday, and that's going to bring us more moisture as we get into Northern California. We could see anywhere from 3 to 5 inches in some of these places. So here's how it plays out. There's the storm that we're watching through today. We'll add additional snowfall too. There's the second one that we're watching through Friday. That's going to be more focused towards Northern California into Oregon and parts of Washington as we get closer to the weekend. It's going to bring, again, more flooding concerns. It's likely that we'll, once the sun comes up in California, start to see some damage as far as trees down, power outages. We have really saturated soil, so that means that it's easier with those gusty winds for trees to topple over. As far as the East goes, Savannah requested colder temperatures, rather. She wasn't satisfied with the warm. So
are those low enough for you?
Yeah. What say you?
Just want a little snow.
Well, you'll have to go to Maine.
You go to Minnesota.
Yeah,
there's a lot of snow there.
Yeah, Maine, Michigan, they'll have some snow flurries over the next couple of days, guys.
All right, still a lot going on. Angie, thank you so much. Let's now turn to the Vatican, where Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI was laid to rest in a historic ceremony earlier this morning. Pope Francis presided over the funeral, which took place in front of thousands of people in St. Peter's Square. Now, a living pope burying his predecessor is unprecedented in modern times. After the funeral, Benedict's coffin was taken back inside St. Peter's Basilica, where it's expected to be placed in a vast underground crypt known as the Vatican Grottos. NBC News foreign correspondent Claudia Lavanga is at the Vatican for us. We're also joined by George Weigel. He's a distinguished senior fellow, and William E. Simon Chair in Catholic Studies. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for joining us on this historic occasion. Claudia, I'll start with you on the ground there. Now, despite Benedict's request for a simple funeral, it turned out to be a pretty big event. Walk us through some of the key moments, like who was in attendance and just what it was like on the ground there.
Good morning, Savannah. Well, the Vatican said that it was going to be sober, simple, and solemn. And at the end of the day, even if it was big, of course, there was a big attendance. It really was that. There were about 50,000 people filling up St. Peter's Square this morning, all united in prayer and silence. And then before the Mass, before the funeral, the casket bearing the body of the Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI came out of St. Peter's Basilica, where it has been lying in state for about 3 days. And when it came out into the square, there was a long round of applause. There were some even chants of people saying "Santo subito," which in Italian means "make him a saint now." The Vatican just literally 10 minutes ago sent us pictures of the actual burial of the casket. So now the casket has been buried underneath the St. Peter's Basilica in the so-called Vatican crypt or grotto, Savannah.
George, let's bring you in here. So this, as we've said many times, we're using these words a lot here, but they're true, unique, historic funeral. It was the first for a Pope Emeritus. And for people at home who don't know, we kind of keep saying that like it's just part of his name or something, but it's sort of this special status of essentially retired Pope. How does Benedict's funeral compare with those before him?
I think this funeral, as Claudio just said, was characterized by a certain noble simplicity. By my recollection from our work together at NBC 17 years ago, this was about an hour shorter than the funeral mass of John Paul II. I think the atmosphere here was one of tremendous gratitude. This was an extraordinary life. Joseph Ratzinger exhibited one of the finest minds in 2,000 years of Catholic history. And I think the world got a sense of how much he was revered and appreciated by the people of the church, who, as Claudio said, turned out in great numbers today, and hundreds of thousands of them came through the Basilica since Monday to pay their respects to his mortal remains.
Absolutely. Claudia, talk to us a little bit about the burial itself. I know certain items were placed inside the coffin. Tell us about those and their significance.
Hey, Savannah, this is really a rare opportunity to see a centuries-old tradition being played out in front of our eyes. Well, we didn't actually see the objects being put inside the casket, but the Vatican said that there will be at least 3 objects. One is the pallium, which is the kind of stolen wool that is on that popes wear on their shoulders. The other one is a bag full of coins and medallions that have been minted during the pontificate of Pope Benedict XVI. For instance, with John Paul II, there were 26 coins put into his casket. 1 for each year. We don't know yet whether Pope Benedict XVI got 8 coins, because that's the number of years when he was Pope. And then the last thing, perhaps the most important, is the so-called rogito, which is a deed that describes the life and work of Pope Benedict XVI, a bit of a curriculum vitae in a way, and what he's done during his pontificate. I'll just read you a very short passage of that. It says, his memory remains in the heart of the Church and of all humanity, and that he was gifted with vast and profound knowledge, biblical and theological. Savannah?
And George, actually, I know you've met and spent time with Benedict before. What were your impressions of him? What was he like as a person? And what would you say his loss means for the Catholic Church?
We knew each other for 35 years, Savannah. I last had an extended conversation with him a couple of years ago. And while he was very physically frail then, his mind was as clear as a bell. He had a terrific sense of humor, which I think most people would perhaps find somewhat surprising. He was so shy and diffident in public. And he had a clarity of mind that was really singular in my experience. You would ask him a question, he would pause and reflect, and then he would answer in complete paragraphs. Not simply complete sentences, but complete paragraphs. As I said on the MSNBC broadcast of the funeral mass this morning, in terms of his significance and what his loss means, this is the end of an era. He was the last great figure of the Second Vatican Council, which began 60 years ago, to pass from the scene. So we are entering a genuinely post-conciliar moment in the history of the Church. And he will be very much missed for that, because he was one of the principal influences on the teaching of Vatican II and then on its interpretation.
Wow, very valuable and personal insight there, George and Claudio. Thank you for your report on the ground. Thank you both.
We want to take a closer look at the life and legacy of Benedict with Father Matt Malone. He is a papal contributor for NBC News and the former editor-in-chief of American Magazine, which is a Catholic journal. Father Malone, thanks so much for joining us. I'm guessing you've been up for several hours this morning. We do want to ask, just what were your impressions, what went through your mind watching the funeral, especially considering how unprecedented it is to see a living pope bury his predecessor?
Well, I thought it was really spectacularly beautiful. But if you were a Catholic, it would have also seemed very familiar, because it was really the kind of funeral, minus 50,000 people and the setting of St. Peter's, that is performed every day in parishes throughout this country. But you're right, this uniqueness of one pope who is burying a predecessor, it tells us something about where the Church is headed and what the papal office might evolve to be over the next few decades. As human beings begin to live longer, as we're able to be more productive later into our lives, I think we're going to see more papal resignations. And in that sense, Benedict's decision was prescient.
Yeah, let's rewind a little bit and just remind us about that period. Also, how he came to be Pope, but then why he did stand down. The first in 600 years to do so.
Yeah. Well, he came to be Pope really because he was the most familiar figure to the College of Cardinals when it was meeting to elect the new Pope. He had stood with John Paul II shoulder to shoulder for 24 years in governing the Church. And he seemed to be the most obvious choice, the most stable choice. And you have to remember that the papacy of John Paul II was this, frenetic and fast-paced series of changes. And so I think the College of Cardinals said, in our next Pope, we want to take a little bit of a breather. So let's pick somebody who's stable, who's dependable, who's also pastoral, right? And they did. Now, going into that, he told them, I'm not an administrator, right? This isn't an office that I've ever sought. I'm an academic. I'm a bookworm in many ways. I'd rather be in a library reading or writing a book, right? But I'll do it. And he did it. He did it for 8 years. And but when it got to the point when he could no longer, he felt, physically meet the challenges of the job, he said, okay, I'm going to do something that's never been done, and I'm going to step aside and resign.
What do you think? We've often over the last week used the word complicated to describe his legacy. Yeah. You got 30 seconds here. What do you think he is going to be best remembered for? What's his impact?
I think he's going to be best remembered for two things. One, he was one of the greatest Catholic thinkers of the 20th century, without a doubt. And secondly, that act of resignation. There are not many moments in history and not many places in the contemporary world where somebody voluntarily gives up that much power.
Yeah.
And so it was a witness not only for Christians, but I think for people everywhere.
All right. Father Matt Malone, thanks so much for your perspective this morning and for getting up early. I guess you would have been up early no matter what.
Yeah.
We appreciate you spending your time with us.
No, very important perspective. You're just hearing, bookworm about him. It's very neat to have you here with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Sure.
We have some encouraging news this morning about Buffalo Bills defensive player Damar Hamlin.
Yeah, in a statement, the Bills say Hamlin is showing signs of improvement at a Cincinnati hospital, but he is still under intensive care and in critical condition. condition after collapsing on the field during Monday night's game against the Bengals. NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett is tracking those developments, and she joins us now from Cincinnati. Maura, good morning. Thank you for being up early with us. So it's been 3 days since Hamlin collapsed on the field, and teams are actually getting ready, of course, to play this weekend. It's for the first time since the incident. First, just tell us, what's the mood like right now within the league?
Well, Savannah, we're now learning, according to new ratings data, that nearly 24 million viewers were watching the game on Monday night, watched Damar Hamlin collapse with that cardiac arrest, and waited with bated breath as he received CPR to set his heart back into motion. Obviously, players on the field, people in the stands, also very anxious watching that. And so that mood has continued here in Cincinnati and in Buffalo and across the country over the last 3 days, because players described it as an emotional and scary scene, even as the Bengals players here in Cincinnati returned to the field where that tragedy happened yesterday, starting up practice, getting ready for this weekend's game. I would hear from the head coach of the Bengals yesterday, who described how everything played out.
There was no rule book. There's no protocols for how to handle that. I thought that they really did a good job of everyone that was on the field could feel the seriousness of the situation, and they did a great job of stepping back and asking the Bills what they needed, us what we needed.
Now, both teams, the Bengals and the Bills, do have scheduled games this weekend against the Ravens and the Patriots, respectively, and that plan is in place to still play those games. But the NFL said yesterday they're still figuring out if and when the Bengals-Bills game will be rescheduled and played. The Bengals players had said that they want to respect whatever the Bills team wants to do. All of this as Damar Hamlin continues to remain in the ICU here at UC Health, sedated and in critical condition, though his family and doctors say he is making lots of signs of improvement.
Which is so good to hear. Maura, we are also hearing from President Biden. He says he spoke with Hamlin's parents. What more can you tell us about that conversation?
Well, President Biden was actually just across the river here for an infrastructure event yesterday, and he mentioned to reporters that he had spoken with Hamlin's parents at length. Now, it's not atypical for President Biden to reach out in some of these tragic situations, exercising his role as sympathizer-in-chief, as we see so often. But what was notable is that a reporter asked him directly about the incident and asked him if he thinks the NFL is too dangerous. He spoke broadly, but I want you to hear what he said back.
You know, you hit somebody with that kind of force. Now, that's not what happened here. But I just think it's, I don't know how you avoid it. I think working like hell on the helmets and the concussion protocols, that all makes a lot of sense. But it's, you know, it is dangerous.
Now, obviously, President Biden not touching specifically on the incident, especially as the NFL says their medical team is investigating the cause of that cardiac arrest. But the fact that the President of the United States is weighing in on an issue that so many across the country have put the NFL under a microscope for, criticizing the safety precautions here, definitely is something worth noting. Joe?
Absolutely, it is. Maura, we've seen this huge show of support for Hamlin over the last few days. Specifically, I want to ask you about this just incredible amount of donations that have been pouring in for his toy drive. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this has been really encouraging to see the community obviously really coming together, again, both here in Cincinnati and in Buffalo. There had been a GoFundMe set up in the past couple of years for a toy drive that Damar Hamlin had set up with his mother, his family, and we have now seen more than $7 million in donations just in the last few days. That'll be going to his foundation to support his community, but we've also seen prayers coming in across the country, prayer vigils in both cities, a memorial, a vigil set up here just outside the hospital as people come and stop and pray, encouraging Hamlin to get better, because as we've heard over and over again, this is more than just about football. This is about a 24-year-old who is fighting for his life. Guys?
Absolutely. Every morning that number jumps by multiple millions. It's just really incredible to see. Maura, thank you so much.
Coming up on Morning News now, more trouble for the royal family.
A British newspaper says it's obtained a copy of Prince Harry's new book. In it, he alleges Prince William physically attacked him. What we're learning this morning about all of this up next. Welcome back. There are more shocking allegations from Prince Harry that came out overnight, with him reportedly alleging he was attacked by his brother Prince William after an argument over Harry's wife, Meghan. The Guardian newspaper reported the allegations, saying it had obtained a copy of Harry's memoir, which will be published next week. Now, NBC News has not seen a copy of the book. NBC royal commentator Daisy McAndrews joins us this morning with more on these allegations. Daisy, good morning. So first, just give us the background here. What is the Guardian saying it read in this copy? Tell us when this alleged incident took place and what Harry is saying happened here.
So this story, as you've just mentioned, was broken by the Guardian newspaper. Now, that is a London-based newspaper, but actually this journalist is based himself in New York and has an astonishing track record of getting hold of advanced copies of books that are top secret and under lock and key. So he's done it again. He's managed to get hold of a copy of Spare, Prince Harry's book, and there are a couple of nuggets that he's already published in this article. One saying that in 2019, just a year after Harry and Meghan's wedding, when they were living in the grounds of Kensington Palace in a cottage called Nottingham Cottage, that William and Harry's relationship had already broken down, that William came to discuss the problems between them, that insults were exchanged and then blows were exchanged. He says that he was physically assaulted. He was smacked by his brother in the kitchen of Nottingham Cottage, that he fell backwards, he fell on a dog bowl that broke, and that the shards of that bowl damaged or hurt his back. So quite a serious incident, and obviously an intensely private moment. Yeah. Apparently, afterwards, William came back. He was thrown out by Harry, but then he came back and apologised. And it seems to be an implication, let's not tell Meghan, let's not tell her what happened. Harry says he did tell his wife, and his wife was very sad. But I think Prince William will be very sad now to have had this incident exposed in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, I think we forget sometimes when we're talking about these royals that they are a family. These are two brothers who have had this drama play out. You know, things like this may happen between brothers, but when you're putting in context that this is the future king we're talking about, I'm wondering if from your perspective you can just kind of express how serious these allegations are, given what Prince William's future is to look like, and also tell us if you think we will hear from the palace at all, especially since we didn't after that Netflix documentary.
I think we won't hear from either of the royal palaces, Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace, until the book has been printed in its entirety, which is next week, as you mentioned. Although I have to say, embarrassingly for the publishers, some books have gone on sale in bookstores today in Spain. That is clearly a mistake, but I can tell you there are lots of editors here in London rushing to get hold of Spanish translators and rushing to get hold of one of these awkwardly advanced copies of the book. But going back to your central question, you're absolutely right. Fights between brothers happen. And in fact, in the telling of this particular story, it's allegedly said that William said, "Hit me back, Harry. We used to have fights when we were little boys." But of course, they're not little boys now. And this will be very damaging and very hurtful. As I said, I don't think we'll get any formal response from either palace until at least the book has been published. And then I think they will only feel they would want to respond if there was something truly damaging and that they felt was a lie, was actually an untruth. But of course, as the Queen said before, memories can differ. One person's interpretation of a situation can be very different to another's without either party really thinking they are lying.
That's a very good point and certainly complicates this matter. Daisy McAndrews, thank you so much. Obviously, a lot to look out for. We'll probably be talking again next week. And we should note, NBC News also reached out overnight to representatives for Prince Harry and the book's publisher, Penguin Random House, but we have not received any responses.
Staying with international news this morning, the United States has reinstated required COVID testing for travelers arriving from China, Hong Kong, and Macau. This comes as China prepares to relax its rules on international travel for the first time since the pandemic started. Sarah Rathner is a travel expert at NerdWallet and joins us now to help explain this situation. Sarah, good morning. Good to have you with us. So what do people who want to travel between the U.S. and China need to know right now?
If you are coming to the U.S. from China, you need to produce a negative COVID test that you've taken up to 2 days before travel. And same thing, starting January 8th, if you're coming from the U.S. to China, You'll need that test 2 days before travel as well. And China is lifting the quarantine requirement, no longer testing travelers upon arrival.
We should ask about other destinations. Are any other countries requiring something similar right now?
A number of other countries around the world are requiring travelers from China to either test before they leave or test upon arrival and possibly quarantine if they test positive. Some countries are even temporarily banning travel from China right now.
So how much, could this impact the amount of travel we actually see between China and the rest of the world? And then if it is restricted more, what are the ramifications of that?
There are concerns that this could affect business travel from China, but at the same time, there might be a boost of leisure travel from China, especially as the Lunar New Year approaches toward the end of this month, because without that quarantine requirement, travelers from China who go abroad don't need to quarantine when they return home, and that makes things logistically easier.
All right, Sarah Rathner, we appreciate your expertise. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
And now let's get some other international headlines. The latest on growing violence in the West Bank. Palestinians say a teenager was killed by Israeli forces.
NBC's Raf Sanchez joins us now from Tel Aviv with the latest on that and other world news. Raf, good morning.
Joe, Savannah, good morning. Yeah, that's right. The Palestinian Health Ministry says a 16-year-old boy was killed by Israeli troops overnight in the city of Nablus in the occupied West Bank. Israel says it shot an armed person during a raid on a refugee camp. 2022 was already the deadliest year on record for Palestinians in the West Bank, according to the United Nations, and tensions are high again as a new right-wing Israeli government takes charge. In Vietnam, a 10-year-old boy who fell down a shaft on New Year's Eve has now sadly been confirmed dead. Rescuers spent around 100 hours trying to figure out a way to bring the boy back up to the surface, but to no avail. The hole he fell down had a diameter of less than 10 inches, making a rescue extremely difficult. And finally, it is a no snow, no go for many of Europe's ski resorts. Record-breaking winter heat has left many of Europe's iconic skiing mountains without snow, forcing them to close at least temporarily. Thousands of heat records across the continent have been broken in the last few days, with 7 countries recording never-before-seen temperatures on New Year's Day. And guys, it's been pretty wild seeing people walking around in T-shirts in countries that would normally be below freezing this time of year.
We saw it a little bit in New York yesterday.
Yeah, it's true. I know. That's part of why I don't like it. It's not right now. But wow, those images are stunning. All right, Raf Sanchez, thank you so much.
Coming up, the Damar Hamlin scare is once again raising questions about the safety of football.
And some parents are having second thoughts about letting their kids play. We'll take a closer look at the possible risks up next.
We're back with the renewed debate about safety in youth football.
Yeah, of course, this is coming just days after Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin collapsed and suffered cardiac arrest on the field during the Monday Night Football game. Now, Hamlin's injury is renewing concerns for some parents about the potential risks to kids on the field. For more on this, let's bring in Dr. Jordan Metzel. He's a sports medicine physician at the Hospital for Special Surgery here in New York. Dr. Metzel, thank you so much. We always love when you join us. So, I mean, this debate, it's not new. Back in 2018, an NBC News Wall Street Journal poll showed that Americans were split pretty much. Look at this, 49% about allowing their kids to play football versus a different sport. Walk us through why it is that football is so concerning, and do you think there is something that parents should be considering before allowing their kids to get on the field?
Well, I'll start with the second part of that question first, and good morning to both of you. As a sports medicine doctor in my office every day, every week, I have parents coming in, and it's been about 20 years now, parents coming in talking about what's the right sport for their kids. Are they built to be a ballet dancer or a gymnast or a football player? And this discussion is never easy because, the best situation is when the body type you have and the sport you want to do align. But sometimes they don't. And, what I would tell you is that over the course of 20 plus years, I've had football parents pop up in the least likely places, lawyers and doctors and art dealers and all kinds of people who have really seen the effects of football very positively for their sons, and the teamsmanship and the bonding and the focus and the concentration, the dedication. So I know when stories like this come up, the kind of knee-jerk response is, should we ban football? I think that this is really an individual discussion, evaluating the benefits and the risks, which I do with all my patients and their families for kids, and then try and make the best decision for each person. It is true that the injury rate in football is about 3 times higher than it is in other sports, but I would really point out that the risk of driving in a car and any kind of fatality is much higher than that. And secondarily, the risk of sitting on the couch and being inactive is also quite high, with a whole different host of problems. So I think it's a nuanced discussion. It's never easy, and it always comes up with things such as this. But thankfully, fatal events such as this are really exceedingly rare. But the injury rate definitely is something we should talk about.
Yeah, let's talk more about the severity of injuries. According to the annual survey of football injury research in 2021, 4 high school players died, 3 during games, 1 in practice, from traumatic brain injuries. I mean, we've been having this discussion for a number of years now. We have seen safety improvements, but what more can parents and schools do to try and prevent these incidents from happening?
Well, I think we've done a much better job. In fact, the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, was founded in the early 1900s because there were 17 neck and brain injury deaths that year from football. That's why the NCAA was started in the first place, to give a foundation for research and study and prevention. And we certainly have come a long way in terms of safety and prevention, but especially on the high school level. I think one of the things that really is notable about what we saw last week was that the second that the player fell, there was, medical personnel and athletic trainers and doctors and EMTs on the scene immediately. That's very different than a high school situation where, sometimes you may have an athletic trainer, sometimes you don't. There is, for example, in New York State, a mandate that every school needs an ambulance and EMT on site for a football game, but in different states, that's not the case. And so there's not a uniformity of standard across the country for what kind of emergency personnel you need on site. Again, it's kind of strange to be talking about emergency personnel when we're talking about a sporting event. I really would point out, though, that these types of events are really quite rare, and it's important to keep this in perspective, because I know that everybody jumps right to this discussion of, should we ban this activity? That's definitely not been my experience.
So, Doctor, I appreciate you keeping this in context in terms of it being rare. I do just want to bring up one other stat from the same study that Joe just referenced. He was talking about those TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, but as we know, Damar Hamlin suffered cardiac arrest on the field during that game. I think this might surprise people. There were 11 high school player deaths in 2021, according to that study, mainly as a result of cardiac arrest and heat stroke. What's your reaction to that? What should a parent take away from that? And also, are there any long-term concerns here?
Yeah, those are all great questions. And so I think that, for example, there's been some discussion on what was the cause in this, and we don't know yet. And so I really hesitate to speculate. But cardiac-related fatalities are definitely present, and there's been a lot done with respect to having AEDs on site at schools, staff trained in CPR. We've come a long way with a number of these issues. The problem is that if you're at a high school and you have 12 sports going on at the same time, and you have one AED, maybe not even on site or far away at another activity, how do you prioritize where that goes? It really raises a whole host of questions, and these are expensive, and it's not feasible to have an AED on the site of every single sporting activity. So we do try and prioritize the higher risk. In fact, what we're concerned about, commotio cordis, the heart getting hit in between beats, is actually much more prevalent in lacrosse and baseball than it is in football, where it's almost unheard of. And so, again, good education, good parental education, good coach education, athletic trainers on site. These are all things that schools can do to make sports safer. But again, I really want to underscore that point, that the risk of inactivity is far greater than the risk of activity. And although we do have statistics on injuries and fatalities in sport, the numbers are much higher in motor vehicle accidents. I'm not defending football per se. I'm just saying that it's an important discussion that people have to have with their kids and their coaches to try and make the best decision for themselves.
Absolutely. As you said, a nuanced discussion. Really great information. Dr. Jordan Metzl, thank you as always.
Coming up, a rare show of Washington bipartisanship.
President Biden and Senator Mitch McConnell appearing together at an infrastructure event. We'll take a look at if we could see more of this ahead.
Plus, Amazon already cutting thousands of jobs, now announcing even more. What's behind it all? That's coming up next.
Welcome back. A little bit of news here. First Lady Jill Biden has revealed she will be undergoing a procedure next week to remove a lesion her doctors found during a routine skin cancer screening. According to her press secretary, the lesion is above her right eye. She'll undergo an outpatient procedure next week at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center as a precautionary measure.
This news comes as President Biden makes a rare bipartisan visit to Kentucky. He was there yesterday alongside Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell to tout his $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee joins us now with more on this. Carol, good morning. So President Biden, Senator McConnell praised each other for their work on the infrastructure bill. Let's take a listen.
We all know these are really partisan times, but I always feel no matter who gets elected, once it's all over, we ought to look for things we can agree on and try to do those.
We can work together. We can get things done. We can move the nation forward. We just drop a little bit of our egos and focus on what is needed in the country.
So, Carol, is this appearance a sign bipartisanship can be possible for the next 2 years of the Biden presidency, especially when you consider Republicans will now control the House?
Joe, I think it's more that it's designed to show from the White House's perspective that bipartisanship is possible, but it comes against the backdrop of an expectation that there's not going to be a lot of legislating or bipartisanship in the next 2 years with Republicans having control of the House. So there's a couple things going on here. One is the White House really wants to draw this contrast between the president's first 2 years in office and what they expect to be real gridlock in his second 2 years in office, and really trying to put that burden on House Republicans to saying that they're the ones who are going to be coming to the table to try to compromise. That's the expectation. And then also you have a president who doesn't expect a lot of legislating going forward. And so he's trying to get credit for things he's already done. The White House believes that a number of provisions in some of the laws that the president signed in his first 2 years in office are going to start to take effect. And the hope is, from their perspective, that the president will start to get credit for that and that Americans will feel good about the economy. So we'll see a lot of focus from the president traveling around the country, focusing on what he's already done. Very little expectation that things will get done going forward.
Well, while the president is out on the road, of course, the big news in Washington is this ongoing vote for the House leadership position. And we heard the president mention that. First, let's listen to some of that.
It's embarrassing for the country to be able to have a Congress that can't function. Is just embarrassing. We're the greatest nation in the world. How can that be?
Look, newly elected Representative Greg Landsman, he couldn't be here today. He's dealing with trying to figure out who's going to be the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. And I wish him a lot of luck. He may be the first freshman ever elected Speaker of the House of Representatives.
So, look, all jokes aside, I mean, the fact of the matter is no work can get done until that vote actually is successful. Has the Biden administration indicated whether it will get involved if this stalemate continues?
Yes, and they've said they are not getting involved. The president said this is not his problem. You heard him there saying this is embarrassing. He said the world is watching. We heard the White House officials say, look, we're just going to let this process play out. And politically speaking, you know, there's a couple things that happen in Washington. Sometimes if there's one party seems to be struggling, another party will come in and try to really, you know, stir the pot a little bit. This is one of those dynamics where, from Democrats' perspective, including the White House, Republicans are doing themselves so much self-harm that they don't need to say anything. They can sit back and be a spectator about this. Now, whether that changes the longer this goes on, and there are real implications, tangible ones, in terms of policy and national security or things like that, that remains to be seen. But for now, the White House is happy to just let this play out and to stay above the fray.
All right, Carol Lee, thank you so much.
Thanks, Carol. Now let's get you some financial headlines. Amazon is announcing even more job cuts as its economic outlook worsens.
CNBC's Pippa Stevens joins us with that and other money news. Pippa, good morning.
Good morning. Well, Amazon's CEO says the company will cut more than 18,000 jobs. That's more than initially planned. The cuts will largely impact e-commerce and human resources and amount to 6% of the roughly 300,000-person corporate workforce. It also marks a sharp turn for Amazon, which recently doubled its base pay to better compete for talent. Amazon is the nation's second largest private employer behind Walmart. And Dell is aiming to stop using semiconductor chips made in China by next year. Japan's Nikkei reports the PC maker has told suppliers to significantly reduce the amount of other made-in-China parts in its products. The company is diversifying its supply chain amid tensions between the U.S. and China. Sources say HP is also looking at the feasibility of moving production away from China. And Meta Platforms is being hit with more than $400 million in fines from European regulators over data privacy. The fines center on an old policy by the parent company of Facebook and Instagram that asked users to consent to terms of service if they wanted to keep using those apps. Regulators say that violates rules by forcing people to adopt terms, allowing their data to be used for targeted apps. Meta says it will appeal the ruling. Joe and Savannah, back to you.
All right, Pippa Stevens, thank you so much. See you in a bit.
Coming up, who doesn't like cool electronic gizmos and gadgets?
You sound like the Little Mermaid. The largest tech show in the world is kicking off in Vegas today. We have a look at the items that will be on display. Here, First Lady Jill Biden has revealed she will be undergoing a procedure next week to remove a lesion her doctors found during a routine skin cancer screening. According to her press secretary, the lesion is above her right eye. She'll undergo an outpatient procedure next week at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center as a precautionary measure.
This news comes as President Biden makes a rare bipartisan visit to Kentucky. He was there yesterday alongside Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell to tout his $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee joins us now with more on this. Carol, good morning. So President Biden and Senator McConnell praised each other for their work on the infrastructure bill. Let's take a listen.
We all know these are really partisan times, but I always feel no matter who gets elected, once it's all over, we ought to look for things we can agree on and try to do those.
We can work together. We can get things done. We can move the nation forward. We just drop a little bit of our egos and focus on what is needed in the country.
So, Carol, is this appearance a sign bipartisanship can be possible for the next 2 years of the Biden presidency, especially when you consider Republicans will now control the House?
Joe, I think it's more that it's designed to show from the White House's perspective that bipartisanship is possible. But it comes against the backdrop of an expectation that there's not going to be a lot of legislating or bipartisanship in the next 2 years with Republicans having control of the House. So there's a couple things going on here. One is the White House really wants to draw this contrast between the president's first 2 years in office and what they expect to be real gridlock in his second 2 years in office, and really trying to put that burden on House Republicans to saying that they're the ones who are going to be coming to the table to try to compromise. That's the expectation. And then also you have a president who doesn't expect a lot of legislating going forward. And so he's trying to get credit for things he's already done. The White House believes that a number of provisions in some of the laws that the president signed in his first 2 years in office are going to start to take effect. And the hope is, from their perspective, that the president will start to get credit for that and that Americans will feel good about the economy. So we'll see a lot of focus from the president traveling around the country, focusing on what he's already done. Very little expectation that things will get done going forward.
Well, while the president is out on the road, of course, the big news in Washington is this ongoing vote for the House leadership position. And we heard the president mention that. First, let's listen to some of that.
It's embarrassing for the country to be able to have a Congress that can't function. Is just embarrassing. We're the greatest nation in the world. How can that be?
Look, newly elected Representative Greg Landsman, he couldn't be here today. He's dealing with trying to figure out who's going to be the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. And I wish him a lot of luck. He may be the first freshman ever elected Speaker of the House of Representatives.
So, like, all jokes aside, I mean, the fact of the matter is no work can get done until that vote actually is successful. Has the Biden administration indicated whether it will get involved if this stalemate continues?
Yes, and they've said they are not getting involved. The president said this is not his problem. You heard him there saying this is embarrassing. He said the world is watching. We heard White House officials say, look, we're just going to let this process play out. And politically speaking, you know, there's a couple things that happen in Washington. Sometimes if there's one party seems to be struggling, another party will come in and try to really, you know, stir the pot a little bit. This is one of those dynamics where, from Democrats' perspective, including the White House, Republicans are doing themselves so much self-harm that they don't need to say anything. They can sit back and be a spectator about this. Now, whether that changes the longer this goes on, and there are real implications, tangible ones, in terms of policy and national security or things like that, that remains to be seen. But for now, the White House is happy to just let this play out and to stay above the fray.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.